Hey everybody, welcome to our final week of our Bonhoeffer book study together. And I apologize for this video coming out late. I was under the weather last week, and so usually, my plan was for this to go out maybe Thursday of last week, but this coming out just now in preparation for our conversation this coming Thursday, and so I apologize for that. And also wanted to remind everybody that we have pushed up our discussion on this Thursday from 6 o'clock up to 5 o'clock p.m. On Eastern time, so that because I actually ended up having a conflict. And for those who are interested, there's probably still time to sign up because it is the digital event. But the Comenius Learning Series is doing. I'll be leading that, and it's on Zinzendorf's theology in the 21st century. And if you're interested, you can go to the Border Cooperative Ministries page and sign up. We'll be leading a Zoom discussion, and I'll be putting out some videos about that. So not directly related to Bonhoeffer, but kind of could, if you are interested in Moravian and Zinzendorf stuff, that could be an interesting thing for you to check out. Also, one thing to keep an eye out, and I'll put this in the email as well, is another Moravian pastor by the name of Zach Deese and I are looking at talking about, there's a Bonhoeffer Advent devotional called God in the Manger. I don't have a copy of it to show you here, but I can also put that in the email. But we're looking at doing a couple videos each or a video each week, kind of talking about the themes from that book as something to do for the season of Advent. So if you want some more Bonhoeffer after this, that might be a good thing to hop on to. And we don't have the details out for that yet, but I'll make sure to email this group once we do have the details of that out and ready to go. So this is probably going to be a little bit shorter video than the other ones have been, just because I don't want to give too much, a whole lot before we have our discussion just a couple days from now. And hopefully this will give you the chance to catch up on the book or to maybe read back through some sections that you maybe had questions about. So I would love for you to take some time and to jot down any thoughts or questions you have. And we'll bring those to our discussion on Thursday. So, on to our last section, confession and communion, or confession and the Lord's Supper, depending on which translation you're looking at. So I thought we would just talk through some main themes of this section to give you some ideas, and then I'll leave you with a question or two that we can maybe prompt us to talk about on Thursday. So in this chapter deals with exactly what the title says. It deals with confession and the Lord's Supper. It talks about how faithful community is lacking when devout people, but not don't confront their sin. And that can be I want to put some context to that idea, because Bonhoeffer, I think this can sometimes sound a bit like, the street corner preacher who is condemning, calling out all of the sins of the world and, calling everybody a sinner, and condemning people to hell. And so I know for me, a lot of times I can associate these ideas of confession and sin. But I think for Bonhoeffer, he's getting at something deeper than the sins that I do. Although those are talked about, he's talking about the condition of which humanity finds itself, which is one of harming each other and harming ourselves. So that's just a little bit about this, where this chapter starts off on the idea of confession. And he links this idea, for him, confession and forgiveness, which are two key things go together, is a breakthrough from isolation to community. So this idea of confessing and forgiving, really, I think for Bonhoeffer, it's less the confessional in the Catholic sense with a partition and a priest and all of that, but more from the sense of that we are sharing in life, and life is messy, right? Like life, if you're living life with people, it's gonna get messy. For Bonhoeffer, this idea of confession, it is a central part of community. It is a key aspect of what it means to be in life together, and so this is also where for him it's connected to the Lord's Supper or communion, because this is the symbolic ritual. It's the place where we meet not just God's forgiveness, but the forgiveness that we extend to one another. So it is confession isn't some pious routine activity like, sort of the Pharisees or the hypocrites that Jesus calls out in the Gospels. It's not meant to be this sort of pious routine, but it is a way to really engage in what I would call the messiness of life. What is a way to acknowledge that we are going to hurt one another, whether we intend it or not intend it. That's part of being in community or being in life together. And so we have to have a way of reconciling that, or it gets pressed down or repressed, and then it ends up in oppositional opposition and fighting to one another. So that's a little bit about where Bonhoeffer is coming from, but and why he connects confession to the Lord's Supper, because these are both confession, forgiveness, and the Lord's Supper is like this 3-part movement for him. It's these kind of all go together, and they culminate as what it means to be in community or be in life together, which is, I think, one of the reasons to me why I think he closes out his book like this. Is it's his way of sort of wrapping all of this information up. And what is also, I think, pretty interesting in this chapter is there's evidence to suggest from letters from students at Finkenwald Seminary during that time that this idea of confessing, person-to-person confession and forgiveness was very, very uncomfortable for a lot of the students. So I think that's an important thing to think about too, was that this wasn't a practice that they were used to in other parts of their life as Christians in Germany in the 30s, that they translated to this seminary experience, or that Bonhoeffer sort of brought in. But this was something that was alien even to them at their time, because it would have been pretty common for a Catholic, even today, for this notion of confession, to a priest at least. But even for Lutherans at that time, this was not a common practice at all. But it's something that Bonhoeffer thought was integral to sort of living life together, which I think is very interesting. But what we also come to find is that later on, these students began to appreciate this process. They began to appreciate this process of confession, forgiveness, and Lord's Supper, and began to see the value in its practice. And so I think that's one of the ways we can see Bonhoeffer bringing all of these ideas of being in life together, of community centered around Christ, all coming together at the end of this chapter through the practice of confession, forgiveness, and the Lord's Supper. So I want to leave you with just a couple of questions to think about for our discussion on Thursday. And I want you to think about this idea of confession. My guess would be this practice is not familiar to you. I know it's not familiar to me. It's still not, even though I've read Life Together many times and read it a long time ago, it's not something I have integrated into like a normal practice. But this concept of getting into the messiness of life, of realizing that confession, even in like the way Bonhoeffer lays it out, it doesn't have to be done exactly the same, but confronting each other in honesty and confronting each other with the ways that we hurt one another and extending forgiveness to one another are still really key parts of what it means to be a healthy and thriving community. And so I want you to think through, like, what does a practice of confession and forgiveness look like? And also I want you to think through the practice of communion, and what about, is there anything that resonated with you about how you practice or have practiced communion in this chapter? And look forward to our final discussion together, and grace and peace, everybody. Bye.